Thank you all for coming back after lunch. We appreciate y'all that you didn't run away. I am Tanya McNair, and I have the pleasure of introducing the breakout session for this afternoon. And I want you all to get ready to hear from our amazing panelists. The title of this session is Preventing Unnecessary Guardianships, Supported Decision-Making, and Other Proactive Strategies. And with that, I will turn it over to our panelists for a brief introduction, and then they can get started on their presentation.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Hello, everybody. My name is Morgan Whitlatch. I'm a senior attorney and the director of supported decision-making initiatives at the Center for Public Representation in its DC office. And I'm really happy here to be joined today by Jessica Bronson, an attorney at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and Thelma Green, of Project Action. And we're going to be talking again about supported decision-making and other proactive strategies for preventing unnecessary guardianships. We're going to tell you each a little bit more about our organizations next. Next slide. But first, okay, here we go. So the Center for Public Representation, that's the organization that I work with. We're a leading national legal advocacy center in the United States for almost 15 years. We have attorneys that are around the country. As I said, I'm based in our DC office. And one of my favorite topics that we work on is supported decision-making in demonstration projects, training, technical assistance, resource development, and other collaborations. However, I used to work for a very long time at a DC organization called Quality Trust for Individuals with Disabilities, and Jessica used to work with me there, and Thelma used to work with me there too, Project Action and a lot of collaborations. So it's wonderful to be back here with this audience. I'm talking about one of my favorite subjects. I also used to be a fiduciary panel member, so I do have experience in representing people in DC cases, people with disabilities. And on this slide, we have our website, which has more resources about supported decision-making that I would welcome you to take a snap with your phone and see and visit. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Bronson. I'm an attorney at Legal Counsel for the Elderly. I'm thrilled to be joining you today. Legal Counsel for the Elderly provides free legal services to DC residents age 60 and over. We have a number of different practice areas, but there's sort of four main categories that we focus on. The first is housing security. So we help with things like eviction defense, housing conditions issues, foreclosure defense, contractor issues, like if someone's been ripped off by a contractor. We also help with economic security issues. So public benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, VA benefits. We have a very robust VA benefits practice. Third is self-determination. So things like life planning. We help people create powers of attorney, advance directives, wills, supported decision-making agreements, and we work on guardianship and less restrictive alternatives to guardianship. Then last, we work on health and safety. So the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Office is located within Legal Counsel for the Elderly. They're the great folks that did the presentation earlier on legal tools for supported decision-making in DC. And we're also the home of the Senior Medicare Patrol that focuses on preventing Medicare fraud in DC. We also do house calls through our Homebound Elderly Legal Program. And one thing I just really want to point out is that for our legal hotline, where we give brief services to DC residents, there's no financial eligibility criteria. So if you or someone you know is age 60 or over and they want just some free legal advice, regardless of their income or assets, they're welcome to give us a call. And one thing that I also want to point out is that I'm very excited that we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Yes.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about Project Action. Thelma, can you tell us a little bit about Project Action?
Yes. Project Action is a group of adults and people with disability. We speak out to help anyone with disability to learn how to advocate and speak for themselves and not let other people speak for them.
Really a powerful choice of change in the district, I know. And you have a motto, right? What's one of your mottos?
What our motto is that Project Action is nothing about us without us.
100%, 100%, something to really live by. Next slide.
Okay, so before we get into today's topics, we just wanted to get a sense of who's in the audience, who's joining us today. So by a show of hands, can you just raise your hand if you are like a social worker or a case manager? Okay, all right, a fair number. Welcome, welcome. We love social workers and case managers. All right, what about attorneys? Can you raise your hand if you're an attorney? Okay, also a fair number. What about court personnel? Do you work for the court? Okay, excellent.
Wow.
What about just like a family member or a self-advocate, someone who wants to learn more about the system and their rights? Excellent, welcome, welcome. All right, a pretty diverse audience today. That's very exciting. All right, so on this slide, we just have a brief roadmap of the topics we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to briefly go through sort of a continuum of some of the legal tools that are available in DC for decision-making support. Again, not going to spend a whole ton of time on that because some of it was covered in an earlier presentation. The main thrust of what we're going to talk about is supported decision-making. The what, the why, the where, the how does it work? And then we're going to focus a little bit more on supported decision-making and how it applies to the older adult population. How it might work, challenges to consider, proactive tips, and then we'll wrap up by talking about a case of someone who had their guardianship terminated in favor of supported decision-making.
So the first thing, Jessica and I are lawyers, so we're going to talk a little bit about the law. And one of the things that, I think is really important to think about in DC when we're talking about some of these issues of capacity is that there's a very strong statutory presumption of capacity in DC. An adult 18 or older shall be presumed competent to have the capacity to make legal, healthcare, and all other decisions for himself or herself unless certified otherwise under the DC Healthcare Decisions Act, which applies to healthcare decisions for people who don't have a power of attorney or deemed incapacitated or incompetent by a court. You're not supposed to infer incapacity from the fact that a person has been hospitalized for mental illness or has an intellectual disability or has been determined and is involved with the mental rehabilitation court in the DC Superior Court. So really thinking about this carefully when we talk about capacity and understanding that in DC, we start from a place of presuming capacity. Here's a list of the main legal tools for decision-making in DC, and it certainly is not an exhaustive list. It's just, these are ones that come a lot in our work, and as Jessica mentioned, we're not going to talk a lot about them because they were covered in another session, but I like to show this kind of continuum of decision-making support, going from the lightest at the top to the heaviest at the bottom, and it really is a toolkit. And I found in my work that sometimes when people with disabilities, including older adults, need support with decision-making, there can be a tendency to go too quickly down to the bottom. Now, each of these tools may be needed under certain circumstances. They all have a role to play, and they're all part of the toolbox. But we have to recognize that they have different weight because of what they mean when you apply them on a person. Okay, and so when we talk about guardianship and conservatorship, we're talking about the heaviest tools in the toolbox. And we need to recognize that. It means that a court is removing the legal rights of a person to make legal decisions for themselves. And that's a big step to take, because we all kind of appreciate the path, directing our own path in life. And so we really want to treat that tool like a last resort, and recognizing that it may be too heavy or too long for a circumstance.
Okay, so supported decision-making, what is it? Before we go into what's on the slide here, we'd like to hand it over to Thelma for a moment. Thelma, what is supported decision-making? What does it mean to you?
Supported decision-making means that I get to choose who and what I want to support me. Mm-hmm. I control. If they don't like it, that's too bad, because they're going to have to accept it.
That's right. Yeah, that's sort of the crux of it, the main point, right? Like you are in control of your decisions. That's really what it is at the end of the day. So here we have a list. At the top, people make their own decisions with the help of others they pick and trust. So looking at this list, that top thing, that's sort of like the steak, that is like the main thing. Or if you're a vegetarian, like the cauliflower steak. And then the things below that, that's like the seasoning. Those are like the details, like the supporters, they provide the guidance and assistance. The person keeps their legal rights though. And it can be either a formal arrangement through something like a supported decision-making agreement form written out, or it could just be an informal relationship. It can be flexible and change over time, and it can be used pretty much anywhere across the US.
And I chose my own people who I want to support me. And sometimes you got to realize it might not be your biological family, but it's someone that you're very close to and willing to work with you.
That's right. You get to pick who supports
you get to pick who you want.
Who you trust and rely
and who
on.
you trust.
And we were talking about this a little bit earlier. If you think of decision making as like a car, the person who makes the decisions, they're the ones in the driver's seat. They might have someone in the passenger seat or the back seat who's, giving them some guidance or helping them navigate, telling them which way they should go. But ultimately, it's the person in the driver's seat who gets to decide what direction they want to go in. In 2018, DC passed a law that formally recognized supported decision-making, specifically for people with disabilities. And this is how supported decision-making is defined in that statutory language. It's a process of supporting and accommodating an adult with a disability in order to assist them in understanding their options, responsibilities, and consequences of decisions, and enabling them to make those decisions without impeding their self-determination. So it's basically just a fancy way of just saying the person remains in control. They make their own decisions, but they can get support and assistance from others.
So I get a lot of questions about supported decision-making, and this shows some of the common ones. And so I thought we could kind of address each in turn, because I think there are a lot of myths and sometimes misunderstandings about what we mean when we talk about supported decision-making as an option. So the first question I get is it new? Well, it's new in the sense that we're seeing more and more states formally recognize supported decision-making in their laws, and so I think that's kind of creating more buzz with the use of the term. But it's not new in the sense that our neighbors in Canada have had supported decision-making in their laws for 40 years. And it's not new in the sense, I think a lot of people use supported decision-making without calling it that. Okay, I think we sometimes use the words, I think I use supported decision-making every day in my life, and maybe we give it a special word just to remind ourselves that if people with disabilities or older adults may need more or different kind of supports than other people, but that doesn't mean that they can't be given the options and supports to make their own decisions. Who can use it? So I think another really big myth out there is that it's only for certain people, or should only be considered for certain people. And I can say I've worked with people who have intellectual disabilities, who have lower IQ scores, who have Down syndrome, who have psychiatric illnesses, who have dementia, memory loss, people who don't use traditional speech to communicate. And I've worked with them, and many have been able to use supported decision-making and direct their own lives. So I really think we should start from a place of thinking of it as an option for everybody when you're considering that toolbox as to what's going to work best for people and what tool they want to use. What does it look like? We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It looks different for different people. There's not one size fits all. I would say the majority of people use supported decision-making informally, without a kind of written agreement. And some people have kind of more formal arrangements with a written agreement that describes how their supporters are going to support them. How is it different from guardianship or surrogate or substitute decision-making and shared decision-making? I call it the curse of too many SDMs. It's those acronyms. You always tell me to be careful with acronyms, right, Thelma?
Yeah, I always tell them when they're using all these fancy government abbreviations, I always say, please break it on down, because I don't understand those abbreviations.
Exactly. So it's important to know what supported decision-making is, but also what it's not. And, when we talk about guardianship or surrogate and substitute decision-making, we're really talking about someone else is making a decision for the person. And when we talk about supported decision-making, it's the person who's making the decision. It's the person who's signing on the dotted line. And shared decision-making is a concept that's frequently used in medical contexts, and it's when, everybody agrees that a certain decision will be made. So medical providers and the person agree, this is the decision I'm going to make. Well, with supported decision-making, you don't have to agree with your supporters all the time. It's the person who's the decision maker, and they may disagree with their supporters. And because they retain their legal rights to make decisions, they're allowed to do that. So is it legal? Yes, it's legal. Okay, we have a law here that recognizes supported decision-making in DC, but it's also been recognized as a reasonable accommodation under federal law for people's disability, including those with older adults. And this is a big one I get, is it safe? Well, it's really important to remember that any kind of legal tool can be misused by bad actors. I've heard of powers of attorney being called a license to steal. I've seen abusive guardianships. I've seen abusive representative payees. I've not seen any studies that have shown people under guardianship are automatically safer. But I have seen studies that have shown that people who have more connections to their community, who are allowed to lead self-determined lives and direct their lives, are safer. Better able to resist abuse. So I think we have to be really careful when we ask this kind of question and really looking what is the underlying issue we really need to address. Next slide.
Okay, so we talked about the what. The what is supported decision making. So let's get into the why, starting with our friend Thelma. Thelma, why do you use supported decision making?
Because it's very important so that I have people on my team that listen to me and not so much worried about what they think I want. They listen to me and find out what I want and do their best to support me.
Mm-hmm. And how does that make you feel?
That make me feel real good.
Mm-hmm. How would you feel if people didn't do that? Like if people just did the decision making for you?
Then I'll be very unhappy. And believe me, the lawyers will be hearing from me.
I mean, yeah, she's not wrong.
Thelma knows who to call.
That's right. That's right. And then in this slide, we also have a quote from a woman who goes by the pseudonym Dolores. She was the first senior in the district to have guardianship terminated expressly in favor of supported decision making. Her story was featured in the Washington Post a few years ago, and she spoke about how empowering it felt to regain her decision-making rights. She said, it makes you feel powerful to be in charge of your own life. You can have lots of help everywhere, but you are your own boss. Again, at the end of the day, that person has that control. They're the ones in the driver's seat. And so why is it relevant to, everyone else? Presumably, we all want to age as independently as we can, with dignity and with autonomy, and supported decision-making helps with those goals. When people use supported decision-making, they have a greater sense of self-determination, meaning that they feel like they are actors in their own lives, rather than simply being acted upon. And studies have shown that that comes with a number of benefits. People with greater self-determination are more independent, more integrated into their communities, they're healthier, and they're better able to recognize and resist abuse. Ultimately, that's what we all want. We want to have, good quality of life in our golden years. On the flip side of that, though, when people are denied that sense of self-determination, they're more likely to feel helpless, hopeless, self-critical, report lower self-esteem, passivity, feelings of inadequacy and incompetency, and that can have some significant impacts on their physical and their mental health.
So let's talk a little bit about the how of supported decision-making. And as I said, there's not one way of doing supported decision-making. I've seen it work really different for people depending upon what their needs are. And so I thought we could first turn to kind of Thelma, and you talk a little bit about how you use supported decision-making. So I know you've really focused on picking supporters. You want to pick people who you trust. How did you go about doing that?
I met with the lawyers at Quality Trust at that time, and they helped me to decide who I want on my team and who I don't. So I chose my godmother, which was, I call her my mom. Her name is Rita Mouse, and her daughter Tammy Mouse, and so I chose those. And I might have one biological aunt that's I put down, and her name is Annie Mae Gross, but everyone else, that's it.
So you picked people that you trusted and everything.
Yeah, I pick people that I can trust, and I know that they're gonna have my best interest at heart, and they're gonna listen to what I want, even though sometimes they might not agree with me, but the final decision is mine.
What do you do? What do you do if you disagree with your supporters?
I let them know that that's a risk that I'm willing to take.
Right, because you're ultimately the decision maker. So you picked people you trust who you knew were going to honor your decision to make a decision, even if there was disagreement.
That's right.
Yeah. And so do you, what do you think makes good supporters other than that? Like other than people that you know will listen to you?
I mean, you can find other good supporters like Project Action. We all support each other. And
Peer support. I think peer support can be a really great way of using using supported decision making. It can be a really great way of using.
Yeah, Project Action is a group of adults with disabilities, all different types of disabilities like me, and we go out and we speak for ourselves as well as for other people who might have problems. Mm-hmm. And my thing is this: when I was going to school and I was on a school bus, it was a young lady who used to ride on the bus with us, and she couldn't speak verbally. This the part that make me mad, because a lot of people think because you can't speak with your mouth that you can't speak. It's a lot of different ways to speak. People speak with their eyes, to speak with their hands. So when God took away one sense, He opened all the rest of the senses that you have. And so that young lady, when she was riding on the bus, I was the first one that started talking to her. And we came up with a way that she could communicate. She would use her eyes, and we would say, like maybe once for no, twice for yes. And that made her feel so good. And every morning when the bus picked me up, they pick her up first. And when I'm coming to the bus, the first person, I look up and I see her. She's just smiling and her eyes lit up. And that made me feel so good.
Yeah, the advice I always give when we were talking about supported decision making is that really asking ourselves, what will it take? So if I meet with someone and I'm having trouble communicating with them, or I'm trying to evaluate whether I think they can sign legal documents and knowingly and voluntarily, which is an ethical obligation attorneys have. If I'm having problems communicating, I don't assume that there's something wrong with them. Hey, I just met them. I don't know them yet. I need to know them better. I say, what I need to do differently.
Maybe ask them what's the best way that they can communicate. Yeah. Maybe with their hands or with their eyes or another part of their body.
And so it's just about really trying to see opportunities. And so I think this slide says out some of those kinds of goals to be kind of working towards supported decision making, but it really just starts from a place of presuming capacity and then challenging ourselves to figure out how best to accommodate someone. Now, where? I'm always asked this question, and so I just always feel I have to talk a little bit about national trends. It's really amazing because there's been a lot of legislative activity around supported decision-making to recognize it. And we're up to at least 39 states in D.C. who have supported decision-making laws. And these laws vary. Some of them are like supported decision-making agreement laws, like D.C. has. That's 23 states plus D.C. Some of them are recognizing it as an accommodation for people's disability in serious medical procedures like organ transplantation. Others are recognizing it in special education for transition-age youth, that when people with disabilities who are students in special education turn 18 and make their own educational decisions, they can get support from supporters. And DC has a law like that too. So we're seeing a lot of different ways to legislate supported decision-making. There's not one way. We have at least 16 states in DC that has court orders that recognize supported decision-making, and some of these states had those court orders even without having a change in their law. And so, that's something to think about too. I think there is recognition within courts of the role it can play in accommodations. And we're seeing it being more recognized as a reasonable modification for a person's disability. There was federal rulemaking that said under 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which applies to entities that get federal funding, that supported decision-making could be seen as a reasonable modification. And we also saw the Older Americans Act regulations recognizing the role of making sure older adults have access to alternatives to guardianship, including specifically supported decision-making.
And in DC, we do absolutely recognize supported decision-making. As I mentioned earlier, in 2018, there was a law that was passed that formally recognized the right of people with disabilities to use supported decision-making. DC was actually the 4th jurisdiction, so now it's gone up to what, like 30?
39?
39, and we were number 4. I think we were almost number 3, but another jurisdiction swooped in and passed it right before we did. But actually, Thelma and Project Action, you were very heavily involved in working to get this bill passed. Do you want to talk about that experience at all?
Oh yeah, I work with them very hard. Not just me, but my other friends and family with Project Action. We practically live down at the city council office, running back and forth, and speaking up. That's how important that we thought that it was for us. So it was a lot of us in Project Action who practically live down at the city council. And we got it passed along with the lawyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely know who Project Action is down at the DC Council. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah, it's so bad when we go down there one time, went down there and testified for something else. And then some of us had a hard time getting in the building. So when we got in the building, the council members asked, and we told them, well, it was a hard time for them to open the door to let us in. The ones in wheelchairs, we had a hard time. Once we let them know, and every time we went down there from that day on, that door was unlocked and we was able to get in.
Yeah, I mean, you made some good trouble that day. I mean, I really want to say, there was a lot of, advocacy to try to make a lot of things accessible. And I think this was one of those kind of advocacy movements. And I really do know the law would never have passed but for the support of people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we had the bill, thanks in large part to Project Action and their advocacy. Even before then, there was a court case back in 2016 for a young man named Ryan King, who had... You know Ryan? Yes.
I know Ryan.
And Ryan was under court-appointed guardianship, and it ended up being terminated in part due to the advocacy of Quality Trust for Individuals with Disabilities. And he was the first DC resident to have guardianship terminated in favor of supported decision-making. And like I said, that was before the law was even passed. And then in 2018, there was an 87-year-old woman who goes by the pseudonym Dolores, who became the first senior in DC to have her guardianship terminated in favor of supported decision-making. So there's a DC law, there are at least 2 court cases on the books, and then there are also resources available for people who want to learn more about supported decision-making and use it. So one tool that I send to people a lot in my role at Legal Counsel for the Elderly is a booklet from the Counsel for Court Excellence called When Adults Need Help Making Decisions and Managing Legal Affairs. It's a non-lawyer's guide to DC's legal tools for assisting adults. It's a fantastic tool. It was developed in part with Quality Trust, Counsel for Court Excellence, a bunch of other groups, and Project Action, who helped us develop the language for that guide.
Yeah, we had to make sure that it wasn't no fancy big government words. We needed words in there that break it on down where we could understand it as simple as possible.
That's right. And then lastly, there is a statutory supported decision-making agreement form that was created through the coordinated efforts of the Department on Disability Services, Quality Trust, and again, Project Action, who helped create the instructions. It's a really excellent tool. If you have the chance to go online and take a look at it, I strongly encourage doing so. It has a template agreement form that's very easy to use, and then it also includes a few pages of like instructions and FAQs, just answering questions about what is the agreement, what does it do, how does it work, and how to execute it.
And also, it's broken down as simple as possible so that you ain't got to look in a dictionary or go find a lawyer to be able to read it to you.
Yeah, you know, it was designed to be so that you didn't need a lawyer to complete it, because you shouldn't need a lawyer to complete a supported decision-making agreement. So I want to turn a little bit more to older adults. And, you know, when I was preparing for a National Guardianship Summit, the 4th National Guardianship Summit, you know, I was asked to co-write an article that really looked at older adults and supported decision-making. And, you know, there's a lot of potential, I think, for older adults. And I think sometimes in this circumstances, I think it's kind of really supported decision-making has gained a lot of traction for people with disabilities, other than those that might be connected with age, but not so much with older adults. And, you know, that we really do see a potential that's out there. It's about really promoting exercising of human rights to legal capacity, like Jessica was saying, and that we all value that kind of right. It can lead to better autonomy, leads to better life outcomes. You know, it encourages people to really, when you're looking at capacity determinations, don't judge people and their capacity in a vacuum, but with support. We all get some support sometimes and in making decisions, and people with disabilities and older adults shouldn't be judged differently in that regard. So really thinking about when you're saying whether or not someone has capacity, can they do something with support? And, you know, it can reduce demands on guardianship if you recognize the validity of less restrictive options, including supported decision-making. And I've really found in this kind of work in talking about it is that it works well in conjunction with other kinds of supported services. And Jessica can talk a little bit about that. You know, it's you know, it is one legal tool that with services can really allow people to live more independent and integrated lives. Sometimes I've found that people are seeking guardianships, and what they're really looking at is to get someone linked to services. And that's really what the goal is. And so really thinking about what the potential is for older adults and not leaving them behind in this movement is one of my goals. Jessica?
Yeah, I'll just point out that it is possible to use different tools in conjunction with one another. So you could do, for example, a supported decision-making agreement and a power of attorney. Sometimes with older adults, I see that happen. Sometimes we work with seniors, older adults who are very independent, are very fiercely protective of that. Sometimes people are, perhaps a little reluctant, I'm not ready to give authority to, a family member, a child, whoever. But sometimes they may be more receptive to something like a supported decision-making agreement now, where you are the sole decision maker in conjunction with something like a springing power of attorney, so that if something ever changes in the future, if there's a medical emergency, something like that, then that springing power of attorney can take effect.
And I did that years ago through Quality Trust. Also, with the Department of Disability Service, they called and asked me, my case manager asked me about that. And I told him I did that power of attorney, and it should be in my file. And when he looked, he realized that I really went into a lot of deep details to get it resolved. I went straight on through from when I get sick, or if I get sick and so happen to pass away, what to do and who to call and stuff like that.
Advanced planning is important for everybody, and I think really promoting that is a great idea.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as far as like using services in conjunction with supported decision making, so there are some people out there who may not have a very robust like family network for whatever reason, and plugging them into services and supports and resources is incredibly helpful and important. And I see that as, in a way, an example of supported decision making. So at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, in my role, my job is to give people advice. I am, in a way, their supporter. I'm giving them legal advice about their situation. I'm giving them information. I may be encouraging them to take a particular course of action. In some cases, very strongly encouraging them to take a particular course of action. But at the end of the day, we recognize that it's the client, it's the person who makes the ultimate decision. And if you're an attorney, you probably know there are plenty of times where clients don't agree with you and don't take your advice. And we have to, accept that.
We also have to acknowledge that, with certain populations, there's going to be certain kinds of challenges that come to this. I think when it comes to older adults, there's a very much, I think, in the disability rights movement, there's a focus on kind of promoting, independence and self-determination, and there's more of an orientation towards protection from the elder service systems. And there's reasons for that. We see elder financial abuse on the rise, and so we have to acknowledge that there's this orientation towards protection. Social safety nets, I think, sometimes there's holes in those nets, and that can also be a real barrier for people. When you get older, you might be more isolated. You have a tightening of your circle of support. We're going to talk about a concrete example of that shortly. There's the risk of financial exploitation and undue influence that you have to acknowledge, and you have to build safeguards into arrangements. And there's also, when we talk about with people with disabilities, we talk about growing capacity. Well, what about the progressive nature of cognitive decline? How are we going to try to address that? And we also have to acknowledge societal biases. We live in a society that has both ableism and ageism, and we have to acknowledge that and challenge ourselves to try to overcome those kinds of biases. There are ways to address those kinds of challenges. You can integrate support with social support networks, case management, financial management, and services. You can combine support with advanced planning instruments like Jessica was talking about. I think that's a very important aspect. We have dementia being diagnosed earlier and earlier, and so using that opportunities to try to be promoting advanced planning while the person can still knowingly and voluntarily sign those kinds of documents. And safeguards are very important, but what are those safeguards be? Should they always be removing the person's right to make their own legal decisions? I would argue no, that should not always be the solution. Safeguards should be about trying to get more supporters that are in their life, so be checks and balances against each other. It should be about training and facilitation of relationships. So there are just some ways to address some of the challenges we identified. Do you have anything to add?
But the seniors should be involved in every respect.
I do believe that regardless of what legal tool is used, the person that it's about should always be involved in every legal decision that impacts their lives. I agree with you, Thelma. I also encourage people to really carefully consider the law. I mentioned, Jessica and I are attorneys, so we're going to talk about the law sometimes. And, I think really looking at what the standard is for appointing a guardian, the person has to be incapacitated, which has its own kind of legal definition. But the really key part I see here is that appointment necessary as a means of providing continuing care and supervision? And that's also built into the definition of incapacity itself. without court-ordered intervention. So when we think about that, what that means is you really should be exhausting less restrictive options before pursuing guardianship, and then really thinking about, once that guardianship is appointed, does it need to be forever? Is the person's needs being met, and could they be met without the continuing involvement of a guardian? So I encourage people to just carefully consider the law when you're thinking about these situations.
So we've got some canaries in the coal mine. These are just certain risk factors to keep an eye out for, things to watch for. If these things are evident in a person's life, to kind of think about like next steps. Is it time to maybe have a conversation? In our office, when we see them, it might be a time where we ask some questions, some like probing questions about, who their supporters are. Do they have like loved ones, family members? Are they plugged into certain agencies or resources, even like religious communities, just resources, supporters that they can utilize if it seems like they do need perhaps a higher level of support. So some of these risk factors or canaries in the coal mine to look out for are things like reluctance to ask for help or support. Sometimes people, they can be very independent, very proud, and sometimes it can, situations can turn into emergencies, and we don't want to see that happen. New diagnosis, like dementia, for example. At our office, we work with a lot of people who have dementia, and it does not mean they lack capacity or need a guardian to make decisions for them, but it's just sort of one factor in the constellation of things we just want to keep in mind. Loss of a family caregiver or like natural supporters. As people get older, their natural support network may not be quite as robust as it once was. Financial indicators, like if they're suddenly falling behind on their bills. In my job, one thing that we notice sometimes is if there are certain bills that have always been paid and then suddenly they just are not. It's something to kind of just keep an eye on and maybe trigger having that conversation. One is like property taxes. So if someone like consistently pays their property taxes, every 6 months, and then all of a sudden they just stop and they fall really far behind on their property taxes, that's actually a big, trigger for us to, think about how they're doing and what level of support they might need and what support we can offer. Impending crises like risk of eviction, that's going to pop up in the case study we're going to talk about shortly, or hospitalization. Is there some sort of emergency going on? And then appointment of a guardian to address a temporary crisis. If they have a temporary guardian, it's certainly possible that could then turn into a full general guardianship. Practical tips for older adults. All right, for the sake of time, I'm just going to rush through this a little quickly. Basically, the what, the how, the who, know what your rights are and how to exercise them. Who are your supporters? Who are people that you trust? Who's reliable? You may have, family members that you get along with really well, but would you trust them to, know your bank account information? Seek support or help when it's needed. And then just remember a couple of really key things. Having a diagnosis or disability does not mean that they lack capacity. And again, that advanced planning is very, very key to protecting rights. Get that supported decision-making agreement, get the powers of attorney, advanced directives in place.
And then before we get into the case study, I want to talk a little bit about restoration of rights. And I'm going to quote from Robert Dinnerstein, who is a former professor at the American University, Washington College of Law. And he said, "Nothing is or should be forever, including guardianship. Guardianship is a powerful decision-making tool, one that may be more powerful than needed. Even if the order appointing a guardian is valid at the time of the initial entry, circumstances can change." I think we have to change our mindsets to think about the potential that guardianship may be a way station rather than the final destination for people. And that includes older adults. And we're going to turn to a case study to talk about that.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Dolores. A few years ago, I had the privilege of representing Dolores. That is not her real name. She went by a pseudonym for the Washington Post article that she was featured in. She hit a financial bump in the road and was placed at risk of being evicted from her apartment in DC. She didn't really have that robust natural support network. She didn't really have any family members or people to support her. And her landlord basically said, we will not evict you if you agree to be placed under a court-appointed guardianship. And so she was put in a pretty difficult situation of having to choose between either her housing or her decision-making rights. And so she ultimately agreed to be placed under the guardianship, not quite knowing exactly what that would entail. And she became very unhappy under it. She did not like having someone oversee, most aspects of her life and making decisions for her. She didn't know about resources that could have helped her. Like, she didn't know about like the emergency rental assistance program, for example. She didn't know about things like direct deposit. And so at Quality Trust, we helped connect her to resources in the community to provide the level of support that she needed. And she became the first senior in DC to have her guardianship terminated in favor of supported decision-making. Now, that's not to say like she never needed help again. My motto is just because someone needs help doesn't mean that they need a guardian, but just because she no longer had a guardian didn't mean that she no longer needed help. And so we helped connect her to resources in the community, because resources are a huge part of alternatives to guardianship. If we can help people, avoid eviction, help pay their utilities, they're less likely to end up under a court-appointed guardianship. She had an issue a few years after that. Her apartment became kind of cluttered, and the landlord had an issue with that. And so we connected her to a church. It wasn't a church she went to, but they kindly offered to send some volunteers to help declutter her apartment. And so just through that support, she was able to, avoid further issue there. And she did go by the name Dolores, in part because she was worried about the stigma, the ableism, the ageism, that just people knowing that she had been under guardianship at some point, people might make some assumptions about her and her capacity.
Because people might take advantage of that situation and think she's easygoing. So she had to be careful with that one.
Yeah, she cared very much about her privacy and didn't want anyone to make assumptions about her. But she did end up doing a supported decision-making agreement and a springing power of an attorney.
And I think that's the key part here is really advanced planning. I think people with disabilities should be doing advanced planning earlier. I think everybody should be doing advanced planning. Regardless of what your age is, it can assist in a lot of different kinds of ways in planning. And I think when we talk about the concept of supported decision-making alternatives to guardianship for older adults, it becomes even more key to really be thinking about doing that really thoughtfully. So we have about a little over 10, 12 minutes for some questions and answers. This slide shows Jessica and my email address. We can always connect you with Thelma if you wanted to get connected with Thelma, but I'll turn things back over to Tonya.
As Morgan said, we get to the question and answer session of our presentation. So I know you all have some questions. I have some questions. I'm going to start off. Please don't be shy. We have microphones here. So again, please feel free to ask your questions. That's why they're here. So the question I have to start off with, it's for Jessica. We talked about a lot about supported decision making, but my question for you is, what are the most common reasons why people who may need support with decision making and their families, why do they resist proactive planning? Because we've talked a lot about advanced planning. What are some of the reasons why people resist proactive planning, and how can we best overcome that resistance and help them understand the benefits of early intervention strategies?
That's a great question. There are a lot of different reasons why people might be reluctant to get help, seek help, accept help, or do advanced planning. I think a big part or a big reason has to do with that stigma piece, the ableism, the ageism, the idea that if I am, like an 85-year-old woman or a person with a developmental disability or a certain type of disability, I might be worried, are people going to assume that if I ask for help, then that means I can't do anything for myself and I need somebody to step in and do everything for me and take care of everything for me. So I think that's a big reason. There are also others, there may be barriers to getting help, cultural barriers, language barriers, accessibility barriers. People may have had negative experiences. Perhaps they've asked for help in the past and they didn't get the help that they were looking for, or they just had some other sort of negative experience. Some of the stuff can be difficult to think about, like with the life planning, the advanced planning. Some of it has to do with like end of life care and death, and those can be delicate topics for people to think about. As far as how to overcome it, there isn't necessarily like a 1-step, 2-step, 3-step process. It depends on the person, it depends on the relationship, but there are a few key sort of traits or characteristics I think that are important to utilize. One is compassion. When conversing with the person, acknowledge the reasons why they might be reluctant to seek or ask for help, and do it in a way that's not judgmental of them. Second is patience. Just understand that it might take a little bit longer to have the conversations about support and advanced planning. It might take more than once. Sometimes in our office, we work with people who've had strokes or have dementia, and it might affect their verbal communication or their ability to process communication. And so we just have to be patient having those conversations. And then third is honesty. With compassion, with patience, if there are concerns, like be open and upfront about the concerns about the person's situation, what options there are, what challenges there are, and what possible consequences might be. I have one colleague who emphasizes sometimes you've just got to come out and just say the words, "I'm worried. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about your situation. I'm worried about what might happen," but at the forefront, leading with the compassion and the patience.
Thank you. Thelma, the next question is for you. And I want you to know, I feel the same way that you do about the acronyms. Like they're just too much. I'm like, okay, I got all these degrees, but I just need you to break it down for me. I don't understand all these alphabets. It's confusing. So I am there with you. You are not alone. So my question for you, Thelma, is from your experience, what is the most important way a professional or support person can help an individual feel empowered and in control of their own decisions?
That's easy. Just listen to them. And they might not always agree with what the individual want, but long as it's not putting their life in jeopardy or the caretaker, I think the caretaker need to listen to the individual. Because we are human beings first. We just have a disability, which no one out here is perfect. Everybody has something wrong with them.
100%. I remember you told me the story one time, Thelma, where, you had a doctor who would always talk to your personal care attendant, not you, that first visit. What did you do about it?
I spoke up for myself. I let that doctor know. I said, "Excuse me," because one of the doctors, when he came in the room and he looked at me and saw me in a wheelchair, before he even introduced himself, he didn't even introduce himself. He said, "Do you have someone here with you?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Well, they need to be in here with you." I said, "Why?" I said, "Because they don't know my situation like I do. I was the one born like this. So I know my situation better than they would know." And so I had to straighten that doctor out.
You did. Good for you. Good for you.
Oh, Lord, she lied.
Everybody need a Thelma Green in their life. So if the one takeaway for me from this session is just always to listen to people. Like Ms. Thelma said, you may not like what that person has to say, but they are still a person at the end of the day with rights, abilities, autonomy. So we need to always be careful to listen to them. Again, we may not like what they have to say, but they have a voice and they deserve to be heard. And again, as Thelma said, as long as they're not harming themselves or anybody else, we just have to go with the flow. So if I say I want to eat a whole bag of M&Ms, you may not like it, but I'm an adult. I don't have to bear the consequences of my actions. So again, just listen to people and make sure that we're taking ourselves out of the situation, because sometimes, because we have all these letters behind our names, we have all this experience, we have a tendency to think that we know best, and sometimes we don't, and it's okay. It's okay. This is a team. This is a collaboration. We're all here to work together and make sure that everybody has what their needs.
And remember, you might run into people who speak in different ways. If you don't have that patience to listen to them right then and there, then you need to find someone that can. Because sometimes people don't always talk verbally. They use their body contact, maybe with their eyes or their hands or whatever. It's several different parts of your body you can use, not just your voice and your tongue.
Everyone communicates, right? I mean, everyone has
that's the
communicating,
main
and kind of
key.
starting from a place of trying to figure out how that works is a task we all should take really seriously. Okay.
And I'm very strong on that one.
All right, do y'all have any questions, any comments? Yes, ma'am.
I just have a comment. When you talk about listening to a person, that lends itself to trust because you're showing the value.
Yes.
That's true.
That's a great point, you know?
That's
I think
true.
it can build trust, is what it lends itself to a trusting relationship.
Hello. You may already covered this because I have a tendency to fall off sometimes. My apology. But I was wondering if anyone is assigned from probate to visit the caretaker. Because I've had my husband, it's been over 5 or 6 years now, in one place. And I think it would be good sometimes that someone would visit the home that he's in.
Is your husband under guardianship?
Which did you say?
She said, is your husband under guardianship?
Anybody?
Is your husband under guardianship?
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage you to contact our office, or we could even connect after, because at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, we give, at the very least, like legal information and advice about people's situations. And so, I think we should absolutely connect.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you so much. I really found this a very refreshing and exciting panel. I also just want to say, I think this goes much deeper than the laws. I think, in my experience as a social worker with elderly, a lot of people feel very obliging to other people in their family, even those that they trust, like, I'll let this person make the decisions, I'll defer to them. And there is kind of that learned helplessness and disempowerment, like with our medical system, like Thelma talked about. So I think to actually really do this as a real society, I feel like we have to go much deeper about our assumptions and how we treat people with disabilities and older people. Thank you. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I think it was an excellent point that you make. It certainly is more than the law. I couldn't agree with you more in this area. There are a lot of different factors that come into play in this. And, we tried to touch upon some of those factors, and you touched upon some of them as well. And so thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
All right. With that, we've reached time. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us for this session. We have a break from 3:15 to 3:30, and then please come back at 3:30 for our exciting panel discussion. Thank y'all. Thank you, panelists.